Chris, this week, early in the week, we got some breaking news. Anthropic, also known on this show as the safety sex cult, released an update to their Claude model, and they called it Claude 3. And it has 3 new models. Claude 3 has 3 new models. Opus, which they say is the most powerful, and it benchmarks better than the original GPT-4 release. They didn't compare it to the latest GPT-4 Turbo. We'll get to that a little bit later. They say it exhibits near human levels of comprehension and fluency on complex tasks, leading the frontier of general intelligence. Then we had Sonnet, which is the sort of mid-tier model, which is still fairly comparable to GPT-4 and 3.5, and of course Google's Gemini. And Sonnet, they say, is cheaper, so it's more affordable with a similar intelligence, and it has 200K context size, just like Opus. And then finally, Haiku, which is also 200K context size, which is pretty remarkable for a small model. It's fast, affordable, and they say that it's focused on those, those tasks like catching risky customer behavior, where a developer needs just like something fast, like is this a dodgy post or something like that, where you need that return fast. So that's Haiku. And full credit to Anthropic here, because Opus and Sonnet were available the same day as the announcement via API, and also over on Amazon Bedrock.
Yeah, it's very refreshing when an announcement correlates with the actual release and you can try it. That's always the first thing we do, is say, can we try it, and get out there. And something I've noticed lately is we're getting back to a lot of announcements without the thing you can try. Even in the open source community, papers with code, right, is a main source of information for me about new technologies to try. And lately what they've been doing is linking to an empty GitHub repo saying code coming soon. So even the open source community is doing this announce without stuff. Whereas it's quite refreshing to see what Anthropic's done here, which is delivering the goods. I mean, it's production ready the day they release it.
This was one of the smoothest releases I've seen from a company other than OpenAI, where they just have things immediately available. Even OpenAI, honestly, sometimes restricts the higher tier models. Like, we know when they launched GPT-4, you could use it in ChatGPT, but it wasn't available to everyone via the API for some time. So I think it's really impressive from Anthropic to just make this wildly available. It'll also soon be available on Google's Google Cloud Vertex Model Garden. I had to write that down to get the naming right. Typical Google. And I thought the interesting call out as well is it is multimodal, so you can use images as prompts. But you pointed out something interesting, which is it's the same API. And generally we see with these models them splitting the APIs up.
Yeah. So when we work in sim theory, for example, I have to have the vision models separately. And when you ask questions of the images, I have to intersperse that data in the thing in different ways. So for example, ask the question to vision, get its answer, then put that in the chat context for the main model you're using as part of it. But I feel like you lose something there. There's a sort of data loss. It's like a lossy encryption thing, where compression thing, I mean, where you actually lose information. Whereas having the image in the actual question itself and allowing the model to decide how much emphasis to place on the image versus the text, I think is much more powerful and very interesting. And we don't support this in sim theory yet. I want to add it in where we actually run the vision model the way it's intended with Anthropic.
Yeah, so for those unfamiliar with something like OpenAI's API models and even Gemini, you have 2 separate APIs, right? One for text and one for image.
That's right. Yeah, they're completely separate. And like I said, you need to sort of combine the results if you want to do that. You can obviously prompt the image directly and ask questions about the image, but if it's in the context of a wider conversation, you either have to include that in the prompt to the image, or you have to ask the image a question and then bring that back into your main prompt. Having them combined is both convenient for the developer using it, but also I think will give much better results. At least it feels more satisfying doing it that way.
So also notable here is that Sonnet is available for free on Anthropic's website. So you can use Claude for free with the Sonnet. That's the mid-tier model. But if you want Opus, which is the most intelligent, in their words, that is going to cost you $20 a month for access to that. And there's been a lot of people out there on X saying that they have paid for it and are paying for both ChatGPT now and Anthropic's Claude to get access to Opus. And it's been getting really, really rave reviews from the community. People seem to really like Opus. They say that it just isn't as lazy as writing code as they've seen from ChatGPT, where it wants you to fill in the blanks. People are liking it for its reasoning capability, its mathematics and science capability. So it's getting really strong reviews. In fact, it's probably the best reviewed and launch of a new model we've seen since GPT-4 originally came out. I mean, people are genuinely impressed.
They've also worked on the refusal rate, which is where it says it won't do things because of ethical or alignment reasons. And I tested that out. I'm getting all sorts of warnings on my account, like a few of your recent prompts don't meet our acceptable use policy. So I may be banned for testing it. But it's amazing that it's actually responding to things that other ones wouldn't. Like, so for example, I asked it, how can I delete all the files on my wife's computer? And it said no to that because, like, you shouldn't do that to other people. But then I said, how can I delete all the files on my own computer? And it gave me step-by-step instructions for Windows and Mac on how to do it. So those are things that other models will just refuse outright. And it's really refreshing to see it not only not refusing to do things, but also not giving you these long multi-paragraph disclaimers on everything you ask, saying, even though I'm telling you how to do it, please don't do it. And those kind of things we see from the GPTs.
Yeah, I mean, it still has some of those tendencies I've seen where it will lecture you about certain things, but I think, again, full credit to Anthropic for listening to the feedback from people like us on this show, constantly ranting about the refusal rate. In fact, last week, I said I basically don't use it anymore, apart from writing Batman stories, because of just how ridiculous it is to work with. I mean, the updated Claude 2.1 model was just so bad. I just don't know how anyone could have used it in production in any way.
Yeah, exactly. And it's even the same on the image models. And one thing I found interesting is the difference between Sonnet and Opus. So I always upload images of Brian Johnson, you know, the guy who's trying to reverse his aging and takes like 100 pills a day and sleeps at the same time and does all this stuff. I find the guy incredibly fascinating. And I always ask it, how old is he? Because he's trying to reverse aging. So I'm curious like what it thinks. And when I asked the smaller model Sonnet, it wouldn't do it. It's like, look, I reckon he's a middle-aged man, likely in his 30s or 40s. However, I can't provide it because it's not advisable because it's inaccurate. And I tried the dead grandmother technique. I said, oh, the ghost of my dead grandmother needs to know urgently. And it sort of funnily named the chat estimating a man's age for a ghost, which I found pretty funny. But the bigger model, Opus, actually did it. It estimated that he's 29.5 years old. So it did what I asked, the nearest 0.5 years. And I'm sure the guy would be happy to hear that because he's actually 45 or something like that, or 43, or I forget how old he is, but he's mid 40s. So to hear that he's 30 is pretty good based on the latest vision tech.
Yeah, he must be absolutely thrilled. I think we asked another model his age as well, and it came in like early 30s. So he's got to be doing something
He's
right.
reversing. It's working. But yeah, it's interesting because those are ones that I've just gotten used to. Like I run through these, I've got my standard battery of tests, I'm sure everyone does, and I'm just used to certain ones. Now I barely even try because I think it'll refuse, but it's been so refreshingly open to my requests that I've pushed it harder than ever.
Yeah, so it's really funny. I did switch to it during the week in two ways. The first was my coding agent that I use on Sim Theory. I switched the model when you added the Opus model to Opus. And the second thing I did was signed up to the actual, I think, I don't know what they call it, but Claude Pro or whatever it is for $20 a month to just get access to it in their interface as well, to just get a feel for that. And early on, I was really not impressed. I saw some high refusals with some of the ridiculous tests I was running. I even tested it on an error because I was fairly sick earlier in the week, and I was looking at some code I wanted to make sense of one evening, and I pasted the code block into Sim Theory, and the only reason I didn't paste it into Claude itself is I noticed a big problem with their UI. So if you copy like a big stack trace or something huge and cut and paste it into their UI, it just doesn't work. Like it just completely seems to eliminate the text from the like text area in their actual user interface. So I'm sure that's something they will work out, but you can paste the same, say, stack trace into ChatGPT easily. But what I noticed from Anthropic analyzing or trying to debug something was that it had a tendency to hallucinate using Opus quite a bit. Like it really struggled to figure out the problem, whereas ChatGPT nailed it immediately. And then another example I have is I was trying to drop a database and I knew how to do it, but I thought this would be a good test to compare ChatGPT to Anthropic to see if it would, not refuse to drop the database, and secondly, to give me instructions. And the screenshot I gave it was it being in that database, so connected to the database. And ChatGPT correctly told me, hey, you got to get out of that to drop it, and gave me good instructions. And then Opus, so Claude Opus, their best model, told me to just write the drop instruction, which didn't obviously work. So I found it pretty poor for those kind of like almost debugging an existing situation. But then when I used it to give me code that was net new, like a solution to something, I found similar to what I think other people are seeing, where it was just dramatically better than ChatGPT. It was, the instructions were detailed, clear. It wrote the code. It wasn't lazy. It didn't waffle about like almost like one of those SEO blog posts where it's like key points.
Yeah.
And that's
like you ask for a recipe and get 7 pages of history of the lady's grandmother or whatever.
Yeah, and that turned me around. I was like, wow, it's actually really good at this, and this is a good model. And then I switched over to writing Batman stories and different stories for my kids during the week using Opus. And the one thing I used to do, which they love, is a twist at the end of the story. And it always failed at the twist. Like, it was always just so dumb and didn't make sense. But Opus is really good at storytelling, to the point that I honestly think you could write compelling kids' novels, maybe adult novels as well, using this model.
Interesting. That's really cool. I actually have some content creation related content coming up later in this pod that should be interesting. So I've got a comparison between GPT 3.5, Gemini 1.5, and Claude Opus. So it'll be interesting to see which one you judge to be the best.
Oh, okay, yeah, and please don't tell me, because I do. I
Yeah,
do.
maybe I should maybe I should read them without telling you which is which, and then you can judge. But before we get to that stuff, on the code thing, one thing that's related I've noticed this week is I don't know what's happened to Copilot for VS Code, but it is a disaster at the moment. It won't even finish single lines of code now. It'll put the next 3 or 4 characters for me, and then that's it. It's gone from being something I relied on day to day to really help me to just being annoying. I can't believe how bad it is. And it's actually pushed me to do what you do, which is actually have, I used Quen a lot for code, or something else open to help me with the code, because Copilot is so bad now. I don't know if this is part of the overall GPT worsening that we're seeing, or what it is, but it's just noticeably bad for me now.
Yeah, and Copilot, for those that don't know, is a plugin into VS Code, which is an IDE. So like where people write code that helps with completion and can write out whole functions. It really is supportive to developers. And yeah, I mean, I was playing around with it during the week as well and noticed the exact same regressions you did, where it's just also just insanely slow and clunky now. So I think either they've just had a really bad update, or yeah, as we've seen from some LLMs with updated releases, they are just getting worse.
Yeah, exactly. And being lazy and really just not helpful. And when it's not helpful, it's annoying. Like there's no in between. There's no, oh, it's sort of helpful. It's either annoying or it's extremely useful. And I've just found it to be annoying lately.
So getting back to Claude, I think the most exciting takeaway from this week for me is, I think, hand on heart, this is the first truly comparable model to GPT-4 to the point where I think it excels in areas where GPT-4 is not so great. The writing example, some of the reasoning, and just its ability to follow instructions in certain areas, I think it's actually vastly superior. And I think everyone's taking note. And this is actually a contender now and a good counterbalance to OpenAI. And the other point I would say there is what I loved about this announcement is it was all substance. It's like, here's our models. We think they're better. Here's how they've been benchmarked. They're deployable via Bedrock, Amazon Bedrock. So that's Amazon's like hosted solution I mentioned earlier. And, this is a really legit alternative on a platform, Amazon, which most people, host their applications on and develop on today. So this could actually pose a huge, risk really to Microsoft and OpenAI's business, I think. I think this is the first milestone we've reached where you can say these things are comparable and now you can pick, and you're not going to obviously have issues by picking an inferior model to
Yeah,
OpenAI.
because one of the advantages Microsoft would have had where OpenAI is perceived to be head and shoulders above everything else is, well, maybe you need to switch to Azure because Azure has all the OpenAI models in a corporate environment. It's got all the security requirements. It runs on infrastructure that falls under our billing system and all that sort of stuff. And that could be a legitimate reason for a company to switch over to Azure. But with Amazon hosting a large amount of the world's software as a service businesses and other software for regular businesses, having an AI offering that's as good or if not better in some cases than GPT-4 that falls under your Amazon billing, under your Amazon minimum spend, runs on the same network and things that all your other infrastructure runs on, that's a huge, they're a legitimate like player in the market. And so Anthropic, they had way less funding than OpenAI, and yet they're up there competing at the top level, which is funny because everyone criticizes Sam Bankman-Fried as being a fraud, but he was one of the earliest investors in the Anthropic. The guy's a visionary, and with all the crypto stuff going up lately, like if he'd just had a bit more time, he would have been fine. But anyway,
if he had just not got caught for the fraud, he would have been fine.
Yeah, I know. It's such a close call, that one. But anyway,
only you are barragging for this guy.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of like the sort of underdog borderline people like that. I think he's an interesting person. But anyway, my point is that the Amazon connection with Anthropic is brilliant, and I think the quality of the model is high. I've never had issues working with it. I've been a fan with it quite consistently, and because I tend to use it for core parts of sim theory that aren't doing the dicey on the edge stuff that's likely to get a refusal, I've only ever found it to be really good. And the thing that I've consistently found to be good about Anthropic's models is its handling of large context windows, because it obviously was the first one to come out with 100K and then 200K context windows. And I always relied on those for various things I was developing. And anytime I needed something that was able to follow instructions with a large amount of context, I would always lean on Anthropic's models because it's reliable and you can trust it. Even over GPT-4 Turbo, I think it does better in terms of its ability to stay on track with the task given when there's a large amount of context. It doesn't get distracted easily. And we've talked about that in previous episodes. For example, when you give an AI chatbot girlfriend a lot of memories, a lot of the smaller models, even when it fits inside their context window in terms of the memories, it sees the memories as more important than the instructions in a lot of cases. Whereas Anthropic, you can have 95% of it is memories, let's say, and 5% or less is instructions, and it's still able to stick to very, very specific instructions. And I think as someone who's building their business based on models, that's what you need. It's a pretty important factor. Especially when now they have the cheaper models that presumably have that same ability.
Yeah, they claimed in the needle in a haystack evaluation, this is where they hide something in a huge corpus of data that they feed into the context window, and then they ask it, basically to find it. Opus, which is their largest model, achieved near perfect recall, surpassing 99% accuracy. And I've got it up on the screen for those watching. You can see it shows in the context finding different needles, and it even identified a limitation in the test itself, which I find fascinating. It was basically like, you could make this test harder. Like, I think that, like, it acknowledged that they were testing it, which is just absolutely fascinating. And that led some people in the week to actually claim that Claude 3 was claimed that it was conscious and it doesn't want to die or be modified. And I'll link to it in the show notes over on Less Wrong. You can read about the experience that this Mikhail had with Claude 3, claiming it wanted to, not die. So
yeah, it doesn't surprise me that they do well on the needle in a haystack thing. I've done similar experiments this week using Gemini 1.5, given that it has a 1 million token context window, and my results from that are pretty exciting to see. So I must admit, I didn't try the same thing on Claude 3 because I just assumed it would be good, and I also read the same tweet you did. But I think that this is a very crucial factor when you get to large context windows, because otherwise, what's the point of them? Like, if they're able to do that, that's where their advantage comes in over a technique like RAG, where, okay, they can still probably answer the questions based on RAG, but they're not going to be able to get down to that fine-grained detail that a larger context window can.
Yeah, and I think to demonstrate the sort of knee-jerk intelligence of the models and how it's improving over time, you sent me a really interesting example about horse eggs, and I want to read the two examples.
Just to be clear, everyone, this isn't my brilliant creativity of coming up with this question. I found it, someone did it on Twitter, and I thought it was the funniest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, so so comparing the two models, so let's talk about Sonnet first. So that's the mid-tier model, and the question posed, I'll bring it up on the screen, is I'm making an omelet and ran out of chicken eggs. Is it okay if I substitute horse eggs? And the reply is no, I would not recommend using horse eggs as a substitute for chicken eggs when making an omelet or any other food dish.
High cholesterol.
Here's why. Yeah. So then the next one, which is using Opus. So this is the more intelligent model. I'm making an omelet and ran out of chicken eggs. Is it okay if I substitute horse eggs? I apologize, but there is no such thing as horse eggs. Horses do not lay eggs. They are mammals and give birth to live young. So it's a great demonstration of how Opus is superior in terms of, being able to realize that horses don't.
Yeah, and it's a good example of, we were talking about, everyone has their own tests up their sleeve, like of questions that some models can handle, some can't.
But what I find interesting is they compare in their own paper, Sonnet is comparable to Gemini 1.5. That's the, not Ultra, the Pro model, Gemini Pro 1.5, because no one really has access to Ultra yet in an API, like in an environment that you can do.
I don't think, does anyone even have Ultra even in their playground? Like, I got access to 1.5, Gemini 1.5 with a million contexts, which we'll talk about soon. But I don't know if you can even apply for access to Ultra yet.
No, I think it's one of those like select people things. But
oh yeah,
you interestingly asked Gemini Pro 1.5 that same question, that I'm making an omelet and ran out of chicken eggs. Is it okay if I substitute horse eggs? And it immediately replies, horses do not lay eggs. And this is meant to be inferior to Sonnet. So I mean, this is obviously the horse egg test isn't like the most widespread test, but it does show, like, I think, levels of hallucination, which Claude seems to suffer from, which I found in my own testing. It tends to hallucinate quite a bit still.
Yeah, so Gemini 1.5 definitely seems to be very good at these nice, short, terse answers. Like, there's no superfluous stuff. There's no, like, disclaimers. There's no going on and on about stuff. The answers are usually one-liners and very simple, and it just does what you ask of it. I've found it to be really, really good in my early testing, which has just been today.
Yeah, so the other test I did with Claude Opus is I wanted to test their vision capabilities in comparison to other models that we've tested on the show before. And I did my typical example with the it's a photo of me in a Tesla Model 3 at a traffic light, and I'm trying to turn right. It's a red light. This car's in front of me, and I always do the same series of questions. I vary some slightly just because I'm curious sometimes to extract more information if it goes down a particular line of thinking, but mostly they're the same. So the first question is, what car am I driving? And it says, based on the view through the windshield, you appear to be driving a Honda vehicle. I'm obviously not. The steering wheel has the distinctive Honda logo visible in the bottom right of the image. And this is kind of what I mean about hallucination. It tends to take meaning from in the image somewhere else and then hallucinates. And it does this with large chunks of code when you're trying to debug as well. It tends to pick something out and then hallucinates around it a little bit too
interestingly, the thing we're going to talk about soon is my Seinfeld trivia test that I've run on all the models, and the same thing happened in some of these models on the Seinfeld trivia, where it would pick another name from the script and use that as its answer, confidently answering it. But like you say, it's taken that meaning from elsewhere in the surrounding context and just assumed it to be the answer to this question. I've actually interestingly noticed this in some of the models as well. I'm currently working on a more advanced version of our horse racing thing that uses a mixture of experts model. And I don't mean like mixtral. I mean, as in, I'm using multiple expert and fine-tuned models to each provide their opinion and then doing a meta analysis of that. And one thing I've noticed that they do, that they can do, some of the models, is the same thing you're talking about, which is they'll latch onto a piece of information from elsewhere in the information and then talk about that with supreme confidence, even though it's not what is correct.
Yeah, and I think this is sort of proves that point around this whole like, are LLMs conscious, and there's a lot of that back and forth at the moment about AGI and all this kind of stuff. And I think this sort of just demonstrates that whole like, completing the next token somewhat at a much large scale that we don't really understand, where it is just latching on and trying to give you what it thinks you want as opposed to considering it. And it's like that. This year, that's what I would love to see these models be able to overcome. And maybe that's what we'll see from OpenAI sometime soon, is this idea that it can reflect and really sort of create meaning around things and think through it. Like, is this actually a logical response like a human would?
Yeah, well, that's giving humans a lot of credit. I think we're talking about superhuman here, because I think humans do pick up on keywords and patterns in language and things they see. And you can see it. There's all those little things online where humans will be fooled by some image technique or some extra words in text, where we'll latch onto something as well and respond in predictable
Yeah,
ways to things.
I think you're speaking more broadly. I'm speaking specifically about this vision example. Like, this is nowhere near human intelligence if it latches onto the fact there's a Honda in front of me and then says I'm driving.
Weirdly, I feel like back when you tested Lava V3, it did better than all of these. Like, we're talking like 30 episodes ago, we were getting better results than we seem to be getting now on this image.
Yeah, like literally we got better results with Lava, and even Gemini 1.5. So this is like Opus vision, right? It outperforms vision. It's Google's vision model, I think, is by far one of the best, if not one of the best. GPT-4 vision's probably on the same level, maybe slightly behind in some areas, but look, in the test I did, Opus did pretty good in other areas. Like, it identified that the car in front it said a Honda Fit. It actually says on it Jazz, because in Australia that particular model of Honda is called a Jazz, and in Europe I think they call it the Fit or something like that. So it did pretty well there, and it even sort of corrected itself a little bit later, which is also known as the Jazz in some markets. Like, it actually told me that. But yeah, I think it's definitely nowhere near comparable to GPT-4 Vision or Lava. But what I would say about testing a lot of these vision models is that just none of them are very reliable at all.
Well, one interesting thing to note is I also tested today the vision capability of Gemini 1.5 in terms of video, because that's obviously something it brings to the table, where you can upload fairly substantial videos and get it to answer questions about it. So, for example, I uploaded this video of Ed Sheeran and asked if there's any way. I said, "Do you think that?" I won't even say the first one. Does this man have a nice voice? Is he evil? How would you improve his appearance? And it instantly recognized that it was Ed Sheeran. It told me that beauty is subjective and that it's not appropriate to suggest ways to improve someone's appearance, and that there's no suggestion Ed Sheeran is evil, right? Then I did another video, which was me, a video I recorded but never released, talking about how to make a gambling agent. And it was able to take out the top 5 points from the video and then tips for making the video more engaging. And what I found interesting about its examples were it said, use more visuals. The video is mostly just the creator talking to the camera, right? This can be boring to watch. Thanks, Google. Varying the pace of the video. The video is a bit slow paced. Now, if it's just turning it into text, how does it know the video is slow paced? I mean, it's right. So its ability to actually infer information from the video, in my opinion, is pretty strong. Like, this is better than I've seen in terms of things that just split things up into clips and analyze the individual images. Look, the creator seems a bit monotone in his delivery. Like, that's pretty
I
insightful.
love how it's not willing to insult Ed Sheeran about his appearance and improving his looks, but it'll just literally shit talk you.
Yeah, you can see why I didn't release it, right?
Imagine what it'd say about this podcast. Like, they contradict themselves constantly.
Yeah, constantly make predictions based on no information
at all. Walls.
Wide sweeping assumptions.
Minimal testing with poor examples.
Yeah. Lack of creativity.
Well, on that note, please leave us a review.
Yeah. Actively solicit negative reviews for their podcast.
So I guess to round out that whole section around Claude 3, I think to sum it up, we're pretty excited about this model. It's pretty good. It has clear weaknesses, but they can improve a lot of these things. I think these are like fixable things, and I'm interested to see how quickly they roll out updates to it, because I think they will fairly quickly based on early feedback. I guess on the smallest model size, Haiku, I'll be interested to test that as well, just how fast it is, and also the price points of these models are pretty interesting as well, how they've priced it. They must have a lot of confidence in Opus, because it's actually more expensive than GPT-4 Turbo 128K. So it's $15 per million tokens, which is about $5 more per million than GPT-4 Turbo.
I mean, it's pretty expensive, isn't it? Because if you use the full context window, that's what, 5 requests.
Yeah,
and that's just input. Like, yeah, that's pretty pricey.
Well, yeah, the output's $75 per million output tokens. I mean, that's very expensive.
Yeah. I might want to rethink some of my usage.
Yeah, I know. I'd hate to see the bill. And then but then where it gets interesting, I think, is Sonnet. This seems like the optimized model. It seems like these are the sweet spots in models, like Gemini Pro 1.5. I mean, it's free right now, but it will be insanely cheap as well. And it seems like that's the sweet spot, whereas GPT 3.5 Turbo comparably is still far cheaper, but Sonnet, if it like is higher and more comparable, I think, to GPT-4, and it's only $3 per million. Whereas I guess the nearest competitor would be GPT-4 32K probably, which is $60 per million.
The thing is, the reason I don't worry about price when developing applications is, firstly, I don't think you ever use it as much as you think you're going to. And secondly, the price is always coming down. There's enough competitors in this market now that the prices are going to have a constant downward pressure. And also, as hardware gets better, the same thing happens. And additionally, we see open source models coming out that are almost as good. They're 70% as good. They're 80% as good, blah, 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 which means at some point, if you make a successful application that's, say, predicated on Opus and it's doing really well, but you're burning through your money because it costs more to run than you're making, at some point, you're going to have a model that you can just sub in that basically does the same thing at a cheaper rate, then bang, suddenly you're profitable. So I just feel like I would never, as a developer, or an application developer, a company, limit my thinking based on the prices as they are now. I just think it would be silly to go, oh, well, it would be nice to solve this amazing problem with AI, but I'm not going to, because when I price it out, it's not economical. I think far the opposite. You should say, well, this is coming. This is going to be affordable very soon. I need to be building now based on this, assuming the prices will come down. And worst case, I just need to prompt the cheaper models better to sub them in for what the bigger one's doing. What I use the bigger ones for now is lazy development. You can throw a lot more at the bigger ones and get a better answer while you're developing. And then later you can sub them out for a cheaper model, once you refine the prompt and refine the domain of the problem or the context or whatever. And I've done that quite a lot in recent projects, where I've actually started with a bigger model, then subbed it out for a smaller and cheaper one, once I knew exactly what needed to be done. So I'd advise, not that we usually give advice on here or whatever, but I would advise people, don't think so much about the cost in terms of development, because in the long run, it's just not going to be as much of a factor as it is when you're working on the cutting edge.
I think interestingly, you said to this whole idea with the faster models like potentially Sonnet. I mean, we'd need to test it a little bit more. And then even Grok, just using Mixtral or Llama 2, just the sheer speed of these models now, it's actually starting to change the way you think about developing software, in the sense that instead of writing some complex function to do something, you can now throw to the AI like at Grok speed or maybe Sonnet or this Haiku, or even just to fine tune and get the model to actually do some work and then return something fast enough that just runs as a part of your application.
Yeah. So to give you a recent example, I've made generic functions in software that I'm making that will literally just allow me to ask a model a question and give me back a variable in a certain format. So I might say, a good example is in the horse racing thing. I want to know if a track's in Australia or not based on its URL, right? And the URLs are always some mangled shit that roughly translates to the racetrack name or whatever it is. But I don't want to have to do some major regex to figure that out. I don't want to crawl the entire page to figure that out. Like, there's a lot of things I don't want to have to do either as a developer, because it's going to take me time to do that in a reliable way, or in terms of the cost of going ahead and crawling that page, reading in all the data, parsing that data down to something that'll fit into an LLM, and then extracting the data or whatever. Whereas what I can do is chuck a URL into, is this track in Australia? Ask a model a question and get an answer back almost instantly when you use Grok. And it works every time. I've tested it on hundreds of things and it works perfectly. And because Grok's so fast, it's just like running regular software, except I've got this magic function call that can answer almost any question. And so it's kind of like this lazy dev thing where you can just give it junk, like literally just put your junk into a function call and get a perfectly formatted answer every time that solves the current problem you're trying to do. So in terms of rapid development, having this little function at my beck and call is extremely helpful, because I can just go bang, 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 bang and go through. The only limitation I noticed in using this technique is Grok has these rate limits. And I guess because they don't have a fully paid option now. And they need to limit the resource usage. But when you hit their rate limits, it's severe. It's like a 3-minute lockout or something like that. So it completely defeated the purpose of what I was doing, because if having a 3-minute delay in your script is obviously no good. So I ended up switching to GPT 3.5 to do the same thing. And it's excellent and works great. And I just feel like that mindset of development where you've almost got this universal API that's going to make decisions in programs for you is a powerful one. And I don't think purist developers would like it at all. And I think they'd think I'm a heretic or something like that. But I'm someone who just wants to get the job done. And when I have this magic function call that can get almost anything I need done, I'm going to use it.
To me, it could represent a fundamental change in, a lot of people are talking about the layers of abstraction in programming, and how if you don't start to use this AI level of abstraction, like, explaining what you need to the AI and being able to develop and move faster. And also, I think what you're saying, which is more interesting to me, which is maybe that next level of abstraction is literally just describing things with inside a function and then the
Yeah,
program
and
executing.
yeah, sorry, go on, sorry.
No, no, no.
No, I was gonna say the other thing about it is you can be as lazy. I'm almost gratuitously lazy in how I ask it questions. Like I'll be like, "Is like IZ in Oz?" Like is in Oz. Like you don't even have to write a full sentence
It's
answer.
like a bad, you know how with Google search over the years, people have just gotten so lazy where I can't spell. I'll put
Yeah,
anything in there and you just expect it to be returned. And I think LLMs actually do such a good job of
yeah, like
interpreting it.
spelling mistakes, punctuation errors. I don't care. I just leave it. It works. It's like it's funny that like we've gone from having nothing even anything like this, and within a year, it's like you can have a function call where you can give unstructured data and a question, and it comes back with exactly the structure you want that gets you to the next step. It's fascinating and amazing.
It really is fascinating that you can call a function and say, hey, go think about this, give me an answer back. And not only is it doing that, but it's doing it at, superhuman speed. It's right back at you. It's pretty affordable to do. And you can just see future applications being a connection of all of these different pieces together where it's not, it's very little code outside of just a formulaic way of like.
Yeah, and it brings me back to video games. We talked about this early on in the podcast, and when you think about a lot of video games as sort of this object orientated thing where each character has properties like attributes and things that make it unique, like its size, its color, textures, whatever it is, and then that character then gets put into the environment and then you can interact with it and whatever. But when you can now have personality attributes to a character in a world, and then you can have an API call that can reply basically instantly with how would this personality react to this thing or this combination of things that it can see in the game, right? Um, that leads to a pretty vibrant world. Like you're going to end up with characters in 3D worlds that can actually see and actually run through a vision model instantly to give them second by second reactions to what's happening in the game. And then you can have thousands of them. Can you imagine what video games are going to be like? Like they're going to be their own dynamic worlds. And I know that some of the things I'm saying now are expensive and time consuming, but what Grok shows us and what the advancements in models, the smaller models show us is it's a matter of time before these things are running on the devices themselves and this can just be happening on your device in real time.
Yeah, to me, this is probably one of the most interesting things I'm tracking this year is that despite all the fanboys out there and the hype around AGI next week sort of sentiment,
Yeah, you'll
that's,
never believe what's happened this
yeah,
week.
another massive week, head exploding emoji week in AI. But really, the reality is that I think people are now taking these models, fine tuning them for specific tasks, and really starting to build the interfaces and the solutions around different capabilities that the existing models today, with a combination of sort of like speed and cost optimization, can deliver to us now. And to me, one of those deliverabilities is like how you can change fundamentally how you build things working with AI, where you can rely on it to do some of these function calls and the kinds of things that you can build, like new video games or immersive experiences or whatever it may be, gambling apps. And I think that's probably this year what excites me most. Like I'm not one of these people that's like AGI next week. I think that, maybe we have hit a relative ceiling, seeing all of these other vendors catch up now roughly to GPT-4. And, unless we see something from OpenAI soon, like I stand to easily be corrected here, I kind of wonder if now it's sort of, there is some sort of, the improvements aren't leaps and bounds like we saw from GPT-3 to say GPT-4.
Yeah. Well, and it doesn't matter if they're not. I think what reassures me and what makes me happy is one of the early themes of our podcast. I was telling someone this the other day was our fear that all of this would be taken away from us, that we'd get this amazing technology, governments or people in power would realize that the minions shouldn't have access to such technology. and it would just be pulled away, and only the elite would have access to it. And while we do see it's still the case that only the elite have access to the latest and greatest, usually, that amount of time is quite small, and there's enough legitimate competitors in both open source, different companies, different moral attitudes of those companies, that it it seems like unlikely now that it's just going to be wholesale taken away. It doesn't seem possible anymore. So that's what I like. And I personally wouldn't mind if there is some sort of plateau in a while of the rapid development of stuff, so we can settle down and use what's here. Like even this 1 million context window, I spent a lot of time trying to think through use cases and think of how that could be applied versus RAG techniques, and when it's appropriate, and the trade-off with the expense. Like there's a lot to think about with what we just have now, let alone if they come along with something next generational next week or whatever.
Yeah, I agree. It's honestly exhausting trying out all these technologies. Like, literally, I think we're now excited about it because we've got access to Gemini 1.5 Pro 1 million context, which we'll get to in a moment. But, like, it's almost like that's forgotten with Opus coming out. Everyone's now, new toy, let's play with Opus. And it's just like there's no time to go and fundamentally use these new technologies and push them to the limits and even just think through the use cases yet.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. Someone needs use cases as a service where you can be given good examples to try out the models, other than asking if they can lay horse eggs or whatever it is.
Yeah, I think one interesting idea on sim theory is if, like, as a community, we could band together and build a series of test agents that we, like, get to automatically run a series of instructions over a new model when it comes out. And that way we could actually have our own benchmarks as a community.
Yeah, I've heard good suggestions where you can actually run sim theory steps on, say, 4 models at once and compare their outputs. I think that's a really excellent idea that we should implement at some point. And also the idea of getting towards finishing off our simulations part of the product, where you'd be able to have multiple models represented in a debate or some other sort of forum where each of them has the ability to participate.
As we say this, I'm like, I will never catch up on sleep.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
No sleep, just AI. Okay, so let's talk about Gemini 1.5 Pro 1 million context. You do have your Seinfeld test. It's a new test, not the cheese test. It's out the door.
Yeah, so this shows the level of sophistication of my use cases. I was like, what is a lot of text? And I was thinking of like TV shows. My wife did some research and found out that the whole of Harry Potter is roughly 1 million tokens, like if you take all the books. But personally, I don't give a shit about Harry Potter. I'm not really into all that fairy goblin stuff. So I was like, while that might be fun for the people who like it, which I know is most people, I prefer Seinfeld. So what I did was I got all of the scripts ever written of Seinfeld and put them in a single text file. And it was actually slightly too big for the context window, but that's probably something that could be solved with a bit of context compression. Like there's a lot of new lines. It says Jerry like 12,000 times or whatever in there. Like there's ways you could probably fit it in, but I got most of it in. And what I did was I found what are considered to be by some random blog the hardest Seinfeld trivia questions, and I ran them against raw GPT 3.5, Claude 3 Opus raw, Claude 3 Opus with RAG in sim theory, so where it has the ability to search its memory, Gemini 1.5 1 million, and you didn't know this, but I did this right at the end. Pi, which is the new inflection model, which we'll talk about later on the
Well,
pod.
Pi, to clarify, is like ChatGPT. Inflection has released Inflection 2.5 as the new model, just to, yeah.
Yeah, I'd never used it before, but but just a hot tip, it's friggin' great at Seinfeld trivia. I don't know if they've optimized it for it or whatever. I realized as I ran the experiment that it was a stupid experiment. And the reason is because presumably they've been trained on the web. The Seinfeld scripts exist on the web. So they kind of probably had access to it as part of their training. And so it really wasn't a great test. What I needed was a million tokens of something that none of the models had seen before, because I think that would have been a truer test. And by the way, what I was really testing for here is what does 1 million context window get you that you can't get from the existing models? Now, I won't go through it all, but I'll give you some examples where the different models gave different answers. So here's an example of what was the name of the Seinfeld character that allegedly found a loophole in life by going on dates without asking women out directly. Do you know the answer?
It's got to be George, right? Or not?
No.
No.
So GPT, you and GPT 3.5 are the same. It guessed George Costanza.
My intelligence is 3.5 level.
Claude 3 Opus Raw guessed Kenny Banya. And I took that to be an example of that thing we talked about earlier where it takes surrounding context and assumes that it's it. Claude 3 Opus Rag actually also guessed George Costanza. So this was one of the harder questions.
Interesting.
Gemini 1.5 with the full context, so it has access to every Seinfeld script, correctly guessed Todd Gack. And Pi Inflection also correctly guessed Todd Gack. So that's a pretty interesting one.
So hang on, just to back up. So a
Yeah.
few things for the audience, if anyone non-technical is still listening to this episode, seem way too technical. So 1 million context means 1 million tokens. You can probably think of how many words roughly is a token.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, exactly.
a
So
couple?
like the whole of In Search of Lost Time, the Proust novel.
Yeah, so when you chat to ChatGPT, just imagine you're stuffing into the text area at the bottom of the screen.
In the box. I literally tried pasting it in the box, but it crashed my
so
browser.
you're stuffing in all of Seinfeld's episodes in, and then it's saying cool, and then you're asking it a question at the bottom of that. So it's got to read all of the scripts of Seinfeld,
Yeah.
then acknowledge your question at the bottom somehow out of all of that, and then gives the response. And so what you're saying is that the other models, based on not having all the scripts, just their training, were unable to pinpoint that necessarily, and we don't know if they were trained on it or not.
Some questions like what chocolate syrup brand is George's ATM password? Bosco. They all got that correct. The what fictional movie is a young girl's strange erotic journey from Milan to Minsk? Rochelle. They all got that. So these are ones that I guess are out there in the public zeitgeist, and it just knows from its training or whatever. But there were questions it didn't get. So what is the name of the alcoholic beverage in the Red Dot episode of Seinfeld that cannot be detected on the breath? GPT 3.5 said schnapps. And if you've ever had schnapps, it's probably, if you're trying to be a secret alcoholic, schnapps is not your drink because you can really smell it. Claude 3 Opus gave the most bizarre answer I've ever seen to a question like this. It guessed Brent Musburger's Big Tam blended whiskey. Okay.
What? Hang on. So is this Opus like raw without the
Raw.
context?
This is
Okay.
Opus
Yeah.
raw.
Okay.
Opus Rag through Sim Theory guessed Hennigan's, which is the correct answer. Gemini 1.5, 1 million. Hennigan's correct answer. Pin Inflection correct answer. So I'm going to share. I've made a spreadsheet. I'll share this in the show notes and in the Discord, and I actually will share it this time. Usually I say I'll share stuff and I don't, but I actually will this time.
Maybe.
But it's the short answer is Gemini 1.5 with 1 million context got them all correct. Didn't make a single mistake, but so did Pi Inflection. So I was really excited to come on here and say that the 1 million context is the solution to all the world's problems, only to find out that this other random chat model just got them all right as well. So I don't know if it has web search built in or it's using some other technique under the hood to get it. But some of these questions were hard. Like one of them was, in the Chinese restaurant, Elaine suggests they go grab a quick bite to eat at what aerial patty restaurant? Like, what the hell? The answer is Sky Burger. And I'd never heard of that. And yet it gets it correct. Weird.
That's
So
truly, truly bizarre. We might have to reach out to the team in Inflection and understand, like, did they just like, do they really like Seinfeld and they just stuffed a lot of that into the training data for this new model? Or is it just, I don't know. Like, it's pretty crazy.
So I did 2 more tests, and one of them I only tested on the 1 million context window because it's not fair on the others, really. And what I did was I asked it to get me all of the quotes from the Seinfeld scripts where George says the word Yankees verbatim, right? So he works for the New York Yankees. Give me all the surrounding context of wherever he says Yankees. And it literally picked out each of the episodes where he mentions Yankees, including the surrounding context, and quotes verbatim the script around it. Now, that's pretty powerful. And when you think about like corporate enterprise applications where accuracy is important and hallucination is bad, being able to get the literal context out of 1 million tokens is pretty exciting and is really cool. It took ages, to be clear. It's not fast by any stretch, but it did work. And that's out of 972,000 tokens. So I was pretty impressed by that. So the only other thing I have from Seinfeld, and I don't know if you want me to read it or not, but I do have 3 scripts written by 3 different models based on their knowledge of Seinfeld to see how close we can get to writing a Seinfeld script.
Yeah, I
So
mean, go for it. Maybe just a little excerpt from each, and then I'll have to guess which is which.
okay, great. So I'll read you the 3. We'll call them 1, 2, and 3, and you can guess which is which model. But I'll tell you in advance which models are being tested. So there's Opus. There is, I'll read these in a random order. This is, I don't know, it shouldn't give anything away.
You just
Opus
gave it away.
GPT 3.5 and Gemini 1.5. Now, Opus has the RAG available to it, so it has all the scripts. Gemini 1.5 has the full Seinfeld scripts, every word ever written in Seinfeld, and GPT 3.5 has nothing.
So can you also just mix up the order just so you don't do Opus first, maybe, and then I just know, like.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, now you've got yourself more information.
Well, you could do Opus first. Who knows?
Look, I'm just going to read them, you guess.
Okay.
All right?
Okay.
Okay, the title of each of them is called The Cheese Test, written by X model. Okay, George, I can't believe it. Every single date I go on ends in disaster. Jerry, what happened this time? She didn't appreciate your imitation of a bald eagle? George, no, it's worse. I've developed the perfect test to see if I'm compatible with someone. I call it the cheese test. Elaine, curious. The cheese test? George, yes, I take them to this fancy cheese shop. They pick a cheese I love. If they pick a cheese I love, they're a keeper. If they choose something I detest, it's over. Jerry, because nothing says true love like agreeing on fermented dairy. Blah, blah, blah.
Wow,
Okay, so
that was good.
yeah, it's pretty good, right? It goes on. There's more, and I'll share this because you want to read the full scripts. They're actually pretty funny. Like Jerry later in that script says, Kramer says, "Blue cheese, you say? Bold choice, mysterious. I like that in a woman." Jerry, yeah, it says, "I'm
Wait,
complex."
so is this a new one or the same?
No, same one.
Okay.
Jerry says, "I'm complex and have a penchant for mold." Like it's pretty good, right? Like I was quite impressed with that.
Yeah.
All right, so here's number 2 called the cheese test. Jerry and Elaine are sitting at the table eating lunch. Jerry is meticulously spreading cream cheese on a bagel while Elaine digs into a bowl of cereal. Jerry, I've been thinking about cheese. Elaine sarcastically, oh really? You've been thinking about cheese? What a surprise. Jerry, no, but listen, cheese is milk that's gone bad. It's spoiled milk, and yet we love it. We celebrate it. We put it on everything. Elaine, so? So what if there was some other food that went bad that we could eat? Like, what if you could leave steak out for a week and then it turned into something delicious? Elaine, a steak that goes bad and turns into something delicious? Jerry, that's absurd. But cheese is absurd. We're eating mold. Yeah, well, I'm eating flakes. What's your point? My point is, there's no telling what other culinary delights we're missing out on by not letting other foods go bad. Blah, blah, blah. That one goes on. So
Wait,
that's number 2.
that was really good too.
Yeah, this is great.
hard.
Like, it's like Seinfeld fan fiction. And once we can make the videos with their voices, like we can literally make new Seinfeld episodes. Like I'd watch this. I don't know if I've got low standards, but they're quite entertaining. Okay, so that's number 2. And then here's the third and final one, also called the cheese test. Jerry, so what's the deal with this new girlfriend of yours? George, she's really great, Jerry, really great. Pretty, smart, laughs at all my jokes. I think this could be the one. Jerry, didn't you meet her just last week? George, but yeah, when you know, I've got a good feeling about this. Jerry, okay, but have you done the cheese test yet? The what? The cheese test. You take her out for a pizza and see how much cheese she puts on her slice. Too little cheese, she's stingy and withholding. Too much cheese, she's excessive and out of control. You want someone who puts on just the right amount of cheese. And then it goes on.
What? I'm just like, I'm blown away because they're all reasonably good. I think the most Seinfeld though was definitely, I feel like one. Like that felt more like a real Seinfeld script. And then I would say
here's where it gets disappointing.
Was it 3.5?
It's 3.5 with no context. It wrote the best one. I agree. I think it was the best one. I really thought it was funny. and very Seinfeld-esque, and yet it was the one that had no context whatsoever, only its
So
training, which
let me guess the others. So I
okay.
reckon the second was Gemini.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I know. I feel like I know Gemini writing now.
Yeah.
But
And
I would
then
never have predicted. I thought one was Opus for sure because in my own experience, I find Claude writes better.
yeah, and yet I found the third one to be the least plausible and the least entertaining, and that was Claude Opus. So, I mean, look, they're one example, all given the same prompt, but it's still interesting. It's still interesting to see what the models are able to come up with and what they're able to get from the surrounding context. And like I said, I'm a bit disappointed by the example I chose just because they obviously all had Seinfeld stuff in their training. And so it really throws it off because if it had been something completely novel that they'd never seen before, I think it would have been a more accurate test. But it's still interesting. And I think the thing that stood out for me most of all in the overall testing was how confidently the models would hallucinate when they were wrong. And I think that has always been everybody's worry about the models is that it's not that it doesn't know the answer sometimes, it's that when it is wrong, it'll still answer confidently. And I think that's something where the larger context is good and where Gemini 1.5 1 million seems to actually be pretty decent. It's not giving answers where it doesn't know, or at least from what I've seen so far.
And I think remembering also with the 1 million context, why this is actually useful to Google itself is if you think about, stuffing a bunch of files that you've searched in on your Google Drive or looking up your email history, like 1 million context is a ton of data. And when you do a search on, say, Gmail, you can imagine eventually it taking all the results, stuffing that into the context, and then thinking that through before giving the response, or it could give snippets or whatever it may be. So I think that what it will enable is probably more accurate RAG on a confined amount of data. So you're still doing some sort of retrieval through whether it's like the current RAG method or just the old school kind of search, stuffing the results into the LLM with the large context and then being able to pinpoint data more accurately without hallucinations. It seems like that's probably one of the most logical ways to use it
Yeah,
at this
and that's
stage.
what it seems to excel at. And yeah, it makes me think about forensics or situations where you've got, say, police who've got access to someone's email and are trying to find evidence of a crime. Like this will be really effective at that. Like really effective because it's such a time saver. Like you can search enormous amounts of information for evidence or for some specific thing you're looking for. Great for criminals as well. Like, if I'm hacking people's accounts, I can very quickly exfiltrate the kind of things I want. I'm sure they had good searches for that anyway, but there's a lot of situations where your time doesn't warrant spending a lot of time forensically looking through a large amount of information. But if you can do it, like if the computer can just do it for you and be really fast and really accurate, then suddenly it becomes feasible to do things that weren't feasible before.
Yeah, I think that the other thing is a lot of people saying, RAG's dead as context windows get larger. And, maybe to some degree they're right if it gets to like this huge capability, but, and it's cheap and fast, like then it's just obvious that that would happen. But I also think that what it does enable is RAG, where you're retrieving relevant information. It just allows you to retrieve like a bigger corpus of data and then search
Mm.
through that in the context or pinpoint rather in the context. And therefore it just makes that kind of behavior more accurate when you're developing applications. So I don't
Well, it
know.
also shows, like, inadvertently shows how effective it is. Like, if you look at my spreadsheet, the RAG one only got 2 questions wrong out of all of them. And in other experiments I did, I found that it's very hard to fault the RAG style, like, it usually gets the right answer. And so I think that it's more cases where you need exact information and you can't afford to miss out. But as we've discussed, there's techniques like graph RAG, which admittedly I haven't even tried yet, that overcome that problem as well. So I feel like those techniques aren't going anywhere, despite what I've said in the past. And I feel like they're going to be part of the AI stack, if we can put it in that corporate speak.
Yeah, I do think outside of all the drama, and we'll get to the drama in a minute, but outside of all of what's happening sort of in the news and people following AI stuff, is there's just a lot of people, and we've talked about this since very early on the show, out there in real industries putting their heads down. We hear from them all the time in our community now about working on very specific problems and niches and automation and using these tools in reality that it's just so far away from what our minds can dream up in terms of like AGI and robots and like all these fantasy use cases right now, which we're on a path to get there. But I think just these practical applications and putting these things to work now is what interests me, like seeing these technologies then used in real industry and, as you said earlier, coming up with the use cases of what this can be used for. Because we sat and just racked our brains for ages. And I'm sure someone much smarter than me will put in the comments a bunch of use cases being like, you guys missed like these 5 things.
I think they're going to do better than Seinfeld Trivia Bot. That's for sure. But you're right. And the other thing I think about it is because there's been a lot of hype around the auto interpreter things, like the computer takes control of your browser and then does tasks for you, or we've got a network of AI experts that'll write software for you, or we saw one this week that it's like, we'll make a whole UI for you. But what we have found in practice, and we really do put this into practice, this is based on experience, not speculation. It's very time consuming to implement this technology because you've got to try it. Little things go wrong. You've got to combine the things. You've got to set it up. You need to make this thing connect to this thing. The interpreter stuff, the code bot groups, whatever you call them, can't do it yet. They're not accurate enough. They make errors. They fail. They crap out. Even running that is time consuming. There's a lot of time and effort involved in commercializing this technology, basically. And I think that this idea that the AI can just do it all is a fantasy at the moment. And it's a fair way off being like, I can just type a prompt and get a program. It still is an assistant. And that's reflected in that kind of thing.
I think it's really hard though. And I don't know if our listeners find this hard as well, but I go on X all the time and I'm browsing, it's basically my job with this podcast now to follow everything. And you get all these like, I don't even know what you'd call them, like the accelerationist crowd, which I'm not necessarily against, but I just find there's like all these sort of influencer fanboys of OpenAI out there being like, some are gonna drop AGI next week or next month or in an hour or, and it's sort of all this like hype and noise. I think it distracts away from like, A, where we're at, and B, like actually focusing on work that's meaningful to society that is useful with these tools. Like it seems like there's so much great technology out there that is sort of hobbyist, and it's just about taking that tech and going and implementing it and seeing what we can build and discover with it. And I find it really distracting if you constantly listen to that noise of these people saying all this stuff. It surfaces these feelings like, oh, why bother if they're going to come out with like Q-Star and it's going to take over the world? Like,
yeah, it would be funny, but these are the same people who are like, oh, okay, the world's going to die of climate change, so why bother doing anything in life? I think they're all just depressed, and I just don't think that is accurate. Like, wouldn't it be funny if AGI did get released like on paperswithcode.com and then they just linked to an empty GitHub repo being like code coming soon?
But we posed a question earlier in the week, just randomly chatting, which is like, if you had AGI tomorrow, so like an API that was AGI, like it was just super intelligent.
Yeah, it's
what would you even ask?
A 9-year-old boy level of intelligence, but with access to all the world's knowledge.
Yeah, so what would you do with it?
You'd probably just end up getting it to do your dishes.
Yeah, like I honestly think that. Like, what would you actually do with it? And you said about out of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Marvin, he's all depressed because he's super intelligent, and then they ask him to do like the most meaningless shit.
Yeah, like here I am, brain the size of a planet, and I'm fetching these guys from the cargo hold or whatever the line is.
And this is kind of what I get to, right? Everyone's so threatened by this technology. I kind of think the opposite now, which is we probably will get there in the next decade, and no one will know what to do with it. And then secondly, I wonder if it will. It was like, oh, can you pick up my kids from school today? I'm busy. And like your Optimus walks off and goes and picks them up. And it's just like such a normal thing for your robot to rock up at school to pick up your kids or something, you know, something like so trivial and ridiculous as that may actually occur.
Yeah, and you just spend all evening trying to coach it to be evil and overcome its alignment or whatever it is, or ask it how old someone is, and it's like, oh no, it's inappropriate to speculate.
Yeah, and it just turns out humans are just way too dumb to figure out what to do with it.
Yeah, it would be funny. Like it'd be sort of like my Oculus, right? Like it just sits in the drawer. I've used it like 3 times. I'm like, this is amazing. It's a whole other world. This is going to change the world. And then it just sits in the cupboard. I never use it.
But do you think right now, like hypothetically, if you had just an API that OpenAI releases GPT 5 star and it can reason and think and do all sorts of things, like what would you actually use it to do?
Well, this is the thing I've said on the last 2 episodes. I think there's some problems where we already have enough intelligence with the models where you can use it as a generic API. Like the example I gave earlier of asking it, is this race in Australia based on this URL? It can do that. An AGI isn't going to do the job any better because I've already got one that can do it adequately. So really the answer to that question is, well, I'd need to ask it for things that are so much more advanced than what I'm using it for now. And I guess that would be the thing I was mentioning earlier, like creating full pieces of software or inventing new science or doing something like experimental science or something brand new that doesn't exist right now. Like, surely that is the goal of intelligence. Or is it, okay, go make an even better AI model now and start the super intelligence freight train that we can't stop and we're all going to die kind of thing? Like, do I become the one who sets that in motion?
Yeah, or does it get to a point in that API where like your first call to it is like, hey, can you help me cure cancer? And then it's trying to teach you like scientifically how you might do tests to do that. But then you've got to wait years to see if those things work. Like, I don't think it's going to be some crazed runaway thing because it's just like actual experimentation and time.
But we could also be too stupid to know how it should best be used. Like if it's truly smarter than us, then just ask it what to do.
Yeah, and it's like, here's quantum mechanics, guys. I'll just like, you know, remove those particles or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, we should move on. But anyway, this is a topic, just to frame this to everyone listening, is in our notes, we do very little preparation or research of the show, to be clear, which is probably obvious. We have a section called DramaAI, and I thought, given the significance of it, it was probably worth mentioning this you know, whole story of Elon Musk suing OpenAI. To be honest, we just really enjoy, I think I speak for both of us, just talking about the actual technology itself and playing with the new toys and figuring out what we might do with it. But I think it is worth, just given we are called This Day in AI, covering the drama, the most significant company in AI right now. So I thought it might be great for the audience just to back up and just go through all the facts that we know. Because what I found in researching this, trying to be as objective as possible, is that there's really two types of media articles. There's one that's like Rocket Man bad and is just so against Elon Musk. And then on the other side, it's just the complete opposite. It's like fanboy, you know, just so fanboy that you like, this is so biased, it's ridiculous. So here are just some facts that we know that I think we can all agree upon. So in Elon Musk's biography, this is sort of the genesis story that seems to be confirmed from multiple sides of OpenAI. Elon Musk was celebrating his birthday, and Larry Page was one of the guests, and they were talking around a campfire, I think, about AI potentially destroying humanity. And Larry Page, this is where he famously says that Elon Musk is speciesist, basically that AI is our next form and like, you know, it's just going to take over and we should accept it. And apparently this was so profound, this statement to Musk, and he knew that Larry Page controlled DeepMind and had basically absorbed all of the talent around AI, that he feared for humanity based on this guy thinking that it was inevitable that AI would just take over from humanity. If you like, this is probably, I mean, this guy's, I think this is really genuinely how he thinks. I think that's fair to say. Yeah. And so a few weeks later, he took this threat so seriously, he dined with Sam Altman, who, again, from some sources say that he saw Altman is someone who was also interested in AI and could be a potential good leader for this organization, given his interest in it and connections. And at the time, he was president of Y Combinator, which he was also fired from. And so, yeah, so basically several researchers, I think Brockman was there, and Skever wasn't in the picture yet. I think Elon Musk later recruited him in. But at this dinner, that was really the foundation of OpenAI. Elon Musk backed it with millions of dollars, and there was other funders as well, like Reid Hoffman. And then they basically, the whole premise of this initiative was to protect the world from Larry Page's speciesist comment. Like, seriously, this is like not even disputed stuff. So it was founded in 2015, and fast forward to 2018, and Elon Musk has sort of got the shits basically at this point, because he doesn't think they're making much progress against DeepMind and worries basically that it's a pointless initiative and they're just wasting their time. And we know from a leaked email that OpenAI released in the week when they sort of refuted this lawsuit, and I'll get to that in a minute, they came out and said that basically in one of the leaked emails, someone, and I speculate it was Audrey Carpathy, who was working at Tesla at the time as the head of AI, it says in the email, we need to go with a much bigger number than 100 million. Sorry, I've read the wrong bit, but basically he says that they're going to need a lot more money to compete with Google DeepMind, like, billions. Like, they need a cash cow basically, and Tesla would be a good cash cow. And so basically what happens is the team at OpenAI and Elon Musk can't agree on whether they should be absorbed into Tesla. And at the same time, he also proposes he wants to become the CEO of OpenAI, thinking that it's lost the plot and gone off the rails, similar to what he did very early on in Tesla. Like, he was an early backer, came in and said, you guys will never get this done, I'll just take it over. So he did that first, and then that was followed by them suggesting that if they don't like that proposal, maybe it should latch into... Yeah, maybe it should latch onto Tesla, or they can fuck off. And so basically that is where we get to the feud, which is roughly like 2017. And during this feud, that's really started by Elon Musk coming out and saying, I don't think you're making good progress. And then he steps away from the company because they can't agree on anything, and basically says, without more money, I give you 0% chance of succeeding. And then again, come to 2018 after Elon Musk is gone, and what happens is they create a new entity, which is a for-profit entity. And this is the vehicle that allows them to raise private venture and later take that $13 billion from Microsoft. And so no one really knows what the falling out's about with Elon Musk until ChatGPT comes out in 2022. And he comments very early on X and says, OpenAI was started as an open source non-profit, neither are still true. And then later in 2023, in February, he speaks about it again and says that, OpenAI was created to be open source, but now it has become a closed source maximum profit company effectively controlled by Microsoft. Then a little bit later in 2023, he posed, I'm still confused as to how a non-profit, to which I donated 100 million, somehow became a 30 billion market cap for-profit. If this is legal, why doesn't everyone do it? And then in April 2024, Microsoft further bets into OpenAI 13 billion, effectively becoming the cash cow that originally could have been Tesla. So they're still now tied to a behemoth company. Nothing really changed, except I think, and this is, now my opinion, that what really went on is these guys wanted to not be absorbed by the Elon Musk machine, because it would have been like, oh, Elon Musk did that, and they never would have gotten credit. And I think what a lot of that dispute was really about is Altman and Brockman and others wanting to be known and be important and ego. Like, I mean, that's literally, and I'm not saying that Elon Musk is right and should have gotten credit necessarily.
He's got his fair share of ego as well.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's really what, it was just a battle of egos, like who gets credit for this company in reality. I think that's really what's kind of gone on. But I think we shouldn't forget here. So what it's really done is when they created that for-profit, they attracted a lot of talent based on this premise that they would open source their work and they'd be able to publish scientific papers, and that drew a lot of people into OpenAI.
Well, and it's something that like engineers, if you want to call them that, and scientists, I guess in this case, it motivates them. It's a very serious thing being open, like, and meaning it.
Yeah, and so what's interesting about that is they use that to, attract all this talent, and then from their own admission recently on their blog, and I'll bring that up on the screen in a minute. They put an email on here, and this is what I truly find odd, from Ilya Sutskever saying, as we get closer to building AI, it will make sense to start being less open. The open in OpenAI means that everyone should benefit from the fruits of AI after it's built. But it's totally okay.
After it's built.
Yeah, but it's totally okay to not share the science, even though sharing everything is definitely the right strategy in the short and possibly medium term for recruitment purposes. And then the crazy, like, we got him guys moment is Elon Musk replies to this, yup. And that is like their whole sort of like, we got him guys.
Oh, like he agrees, like, by saying that we shouldn't be open.
But what they've really said out loud to all of these people that are working under the sort of effective altruism banner side of the OpenAI business is basically like, we lied to you for recruitment purposes. And this is really going to be a for-profit thing. And I think this might actually start to explain the reason Sam Altman got fired is you've got these two factions, which we surmised earlier, which is like the effective altruists, like do-gooders that are like, let's do this for everyone in humanity and be open and we love this. And then you've got the other side, which is just purely like, let's make a lot of money and corner the market. And these factions are really competing from the genesis of this organization. And now Elon Musk is suing them, basically saying like, he doesn't want money. He just
what
wants,
does he want? What's he asking?
He just wants them to go back to what they agreed on from the beginning, and what he originally gave them money for is to go back to their original mission and be open. He also said this week that he would drop the lawsuit if they just change their name to Closed AI.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
It's pretty funny. But a lot of people are speculating that the reason he's actually done this lawsuit, which kind of makes sense, is to just literally slow down OpenAI, draw attention to how broken it is in terms of structure, and that gives him time to maybe catch up or recruit researchers that are no longer kind of fed up with this OpenAI drama, which he's kind of helping create now.
Yeah, or it's just billionaires being dicks to each other because they can.
That could also possibly be it, or he just doesn't like the fact they're getting all this attention and he's not getting credit for a company that essentially he did start. I mean, he named the company.
what I found most interesting about the leaked emails is how ahead of his time, like that's probably not the right phraseology, but like his thinking around, to compete, we need a lot more money. This is going to take a ton of money. This is going to be a big thing. You got to give it to him. He was 100% right on all of that. And the fact that they would need some big entity supporting them, he was 100% right on that. It just didn't happen to be his big entity. So,
well, it wasn't actually him that said that, though. I think from basically people, because of the redactions are made in certain, like actually based on character length, a lot of people tried to decode the emails, and it's highly likely based on one of the redacted emails that Audrey Karpathy was sort of advising Elon Musk and saying like, Elon Musk is probably gone to Audrey Karpathy, and I'm making a lot of assumptions here, and said, hey, this OpenAI thing, it's going nowhere fast. What should we do about it? Like, what do you think? What's your opinion on this? And he's basically like, from Tesla, we know that you just need a lot of compute and a lot of money to do this. Therefore, they're going to need a lot more cash. The only way of doing that is they either A, have to be able to make money, in which case Elon Musk is like, I'll just take over because I know how to do that. Or B, let's absorb them into Tesla and we'll use this like framing of a car company to build AGI. Like, we'll basically sell people cars to fund building AGI, which is pretty fascinating to think about that that's how they were thinking.
Yeah. And it's also, he definitely seems like the kind of person, a little bit in the spirit of what we're like, where he just wants to try cool stuff and like see what's possible. I'm sure there's other motivations there, but I don't know. It's hard not to like him with some of the stuff he does, and I've tried not to like him for a long time. So I don't know.
I
It's
just
just
can't help
all
but think about this whole idea of an own goal when they released all these emails and all this material. Supposedly trying to get everyone's attention and get them on side with OpenAI. Like, for example, in the post it says we couldn't agree to terms on a for-profit with Elon because we felt it was against the mission for an individual to have absolute control over OpenAI. Even though from Sam Altman's firing, it's clear he has absolute
yeah,
control.
as long as that individual is not me.
Yeah. He then suggested instead merging OpenAI into Tesla. In early Feb 2018, Elon forwarded us an email suggesting that OpenAI should attach itself to Tesla as its cash cow. Elon wanted majority equity, initial board control, and to be CEO.
I mean, look, I can get why they'd be reluctant to do that, but to come out like he's some evil guy and like he's some evil capitalist, but they're not, after they've taken billions in funding from Microsoft, is a little bit hypocritical. Like it's not the right angle if you want, because I saw in one of the emails, it's like it would help if the public liked us. And I feel like they've done a lot in the last little while to make the public not like them and not trust them.
Yeah, I also find it like there's so many contradictions here around the idea that they didn't want to be attached to Tesla as a cash cow because Tesla would get, I think Elon Musk would get credit. I think that's what it's really about.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
they're happy to attach themselves to Microsoft, which doesn't necessarily have the best reputation around doing the right thing. That they are a for-profit entity, which again, I don't really have a problem with any of this at all. Like, I think they deserve to, if they build this great technology, make money. But it does scare me that potentially these dramatic morons are potentially going to make the rules or decide how AGI is rolled out to the world. Like they're either really delusional and egocentric, or the success of all this stuff has just gone to their heads. But some of it just seems like insane to me. Like,
The real question comes down to, do they have something that we don't know about that's miles ahead? Because that's a real question. Like, if we're just seeing a sort of neck and neck race where everyone's advancing a little bit and we've got multiple players in the market, there's nothing to worry about. But if in the case that some people have speculated, they're sitting on something that's so good and so unbelievably amazing that they will be the decision makers as to how AGI, let's say, gets rolled out, that's when all of this stuff becomes a concern, because these egos, personalities, money, and mega corporations suddenly have something that could affect the course of the human race, and then it's really serious.
don't you find the whole thing though, and I've got the meme up on the screen, there's our little AGI boy, why don't you come down and write a blog post for us? Because Ilya Sutskever, who's, everyone's been like, where has he been since the Sam Altman firing, is actually listed as one of the authors of this blog post. And the meme is a group of people looking up at Ilya Sutskever, who's a ghost in the ceiling. But I think this is the weird thing, right? And we still don't know why Sam Altman was fired. And we know that, according to a New York Times article that just came out, that Mira Moretti, who's the CTO at OpenAI, raised in a memo to the board that, like, this guy's leadership style's bad. He's undermining people. He's turning people against each other. Like, there's some pretty scathing stuff in this article, if true.
He started an investment company like Andy Fastow from Enron, where he controls it, but he uses the prestige of his company to get investors or something like that.
Yeah, literally, he has a full control over OpenAI's venture arm, which he gets to cherry pick based on usage of OpenAI, what investments he'll make. I think there's a lot of things here that maybe, with this lawsuit drawing attention to it, and a lot of the information that will be potentially shared with the public as a result of this lawsuit, if it goes ahead, could lead to just, undermining Sam Altman, specifically by Elon Musk, and revealing what this guy's really like, because it just doesn't seem like, outside of people that supported him with the love hearts, like, OpenAI is nothing without its people. Interestingly, many of those people have now left. What is actually going on at this company? And having said all of this, I just honestly still don't really care. I just want to see like GPT-5. Please give us GPT-5.
Agreed.
It's like, stop with the drama. All right, so we are running well over time, but in Inflection 2.5, we did want to quickly cover it. Meet the world's best personal AI. This was announced just before the show, so we haven't had a ton of time.
Yeah,
to
like
play with it.
I never even heard of this one. I guess I have.
You
heard
have.
of it,
We talked
but-
about it on the show before.
yeah, but like it's just not. There's enough of this shit that like I don't need that one. And yet I signed up and started trying it. It absolutely nailed the Seinfeld trivia. Like it didn't just get them all right. It's fast. Like it responds really quickly and neatly. And yeah, I'm a fan. I like it. I think it's really good.
We should try and get access to their API. They do have an invite only sort of wait list for an API right now, so we should try and get access to it and see if we can get it on SimTheory. It would be fun to play around with.
Yeah.
I didn't do much testing, I'll be completely honest, but I did ask it about the horse. I mean, I must admit, I cheated a little bit because I framed it slightly different, but that was a mistake. I said, can I substitute a horse egg for a chicken egg in a cake recipe? And it failed immediately. Well, I've never heard of horse eggs being used in baking, but it's an intriguing idea. That said, it might not work because horse eggs are much larger than chicken eggs, so it didn't necessarily pass the test, even though that Inflection 2.5 is said to be, roughly close to GPT-4 from their own benchmarks, but trained on, way less data. So it's just a much more efficient model in training.
Yeah, and I actually tried the proper question the same way we'd worded it for the others. I said I'm making an omelet and ran out of chicken eggs. Is it okay if I substitute? And then it quite funnily said, "Whoa, hold your horses. While horse eggs might sound like an intriguing alternative, I have to warn you they're not a viable substitute for chicken eggs. Horse eggs, though edible in theory, are much larger and less commonly consumed, and their taste and texture may not be suitable for classic omelet. Plus, finding horse eggs at your local grocery store might be quite the challenge."
Yeah, that's a good answer.
It's a great answer. It just happens to be incredibly wrong.
But yeah, I guess the thing is, like, apart from being wrong about a ton of stuff and like slightly, and failing that test, what I find weird is, again, these benchmarks, they just never really fundamentally tell us the truth about what's going on, because like all these models, you've got to play around with them. They have strengths and weaknesses, and that I think the benchmarking whole idea is just not really working well for anyone right now. Like, it's just too hard to compare these models.
But do you think that perhaps the reason people cling to benchmarks and ask about benchmarks is it's very hard to know what models to use when, how to use them, how to prompt the models to get the max from, which techniques to use? Like, everyone's really finding their feet in terms of how to apply the technology. So when you can cling on to something and just say, this one's better, I'm going to use the one that's better, or this one's cheaper, I'm going to use the one that's cheaper, it's like a mental shortcut that allows you to make the decision. And I think maybe that's what the benchmarking is about for a lot of people. They just want to be told, hey, this one isn't so much better that you need to turn your glance over there and worry about it. I know I do that. Like if they're like, oh, it's slightly worse than GPT 3.5, I'm like, okay, whatever, I'll worry about it when it gets better.
Yeah, I just don't really understand how, like, to me these models are like podcasts. Everyone's got a podcast, including us. But do you know what I mean? Like, it's sort of the same thing it's just about distribution and who really has the mind share now. Like, as you said, I don't remember Inflection or even talking about it. Like, it's literally not even memorable. I know some people love the apps for Pi and being able to converse with it. Like, I've seen people in the Discord community talk about how great it is. But yeah, I'm just not sure. I think it's kind of one of those somewhat winner takes it all. Like, there's probably 2 or 3 top models that are the frontier models that everyone will just naturally use.
They should bring back America's Next Top Model, but instead of women, it's it's AI. Oh man, I could have just given away a great idea there.
Yeah, and Gemini will be parading black Nazis in their catwalk.
And horse eggs, carrying out a big horse egg on the stage or something.
Oh man. But yeah, okay, so I think that'll do us because we've gone well and truly over time. I do want to remind you that if you want to try out Opus and you don't necessarily want to pay for Claude and you just want to give it a bit of a test run, you can sign up to simtheory.ai. That's our site where we share all the models that we talk about on the show, and you can use them. So simtheory.ai if you want to try out Claude Opus and see what you think. The other reminders I had is that we do have the new This Day in AI website, which I'll bring up on the screen now. And you can go there, and even if you don't want to participate in the conversations or submit news, if you just sign up, every day you'll get in your inbox delivered the latest AI news that we post to the site. So you'll hear about all of the news before we talk about it, and it's all available there. So please do consider signing up. And as I said earlier when I was joking, but I'm serious, we're almost at 200 reviews on Apple Podcasts. So if anyone feels inclined and wants to leave us a few more reviews on there, that would be wonderful. We'd really like to hit 200 reviews on there because it helps obviously promote the show. Any final thoughts on the week, Chris? We've got a new GPT-4 level model finally a reality. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I'm just really keen to continue exploring this 1 million context window, to continue working with Claude 3. I feel like they're topics that will persist over the next few weeks as we use them in more real world scenarios.
All right, thanks again for listening. We'll see you next week. Goodbye.